And I had forgotten that St. Joseph's, because when I got to St. Joseph's, which is on my way home, the lights were on. And I said, oh, they're having the vigil mass for the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. Okay, so I said, and I was tired that night. I was tired. And I called Susan. I said, hey, you want to go to Mass at St. Joseph's for tomorrow? You want to do it tonight? And she says, no, I'm too tired. I'm going to go tomorrow. She said, but if you want to go tonight, go ahead and go. I said, all right. I said, I'm tired. I'm going to go tonight. So I arrived at St. Joseph's that night at 7:13. Mass started at 7:33.
Marion Barnes is the host now. Robert Coley is the host now.
And at the instant he did, that same feeling of peace, which I don't think I mentioned this to you, that same feeling of peace that you get during the apparition while it was taking place in St. Joseph's, and the night I said thanks for nothing the night Christopher was beat up, that same feeling at the instant he placed the host on my tongue, there it was. I'm experiencing it again. And I glanced at my watch. 8:13 and 33 seconds. Okay. Well, Mass ended. I drove home. And I told Susan I was kind of tired. And she said that she wasn't feeling good, that she felt like she was getting ready to come down with something. So she was going to stop in the guest room. So I went upstairs and I went to bed. Susan drove her pillow into the guest room. And then I go to bed. I go to sleep. I wake up all of a sudden praying a Hail Mary. I looked over at the clock, and it was 3:33 in the morning. All right. If you get up and walk out of here when I tell you this, I don't buy it. Okay. All of a sudden, this brilliant white light flashed in the room. And it filled my entire field of vision with absolutely nothing but this white light. You couldn't see anything around the edges of the white light. Every centimeter of vision was this white light. Bright, but not blinding. And then all of a sudden, just like, bang, there she was, right in the middle of that white light. And she did not say a word. She just smiled. And she had this kind of smile on her face that was like coming from the inside out, is the best way I can put it. It was like every part of her being was just radiant. And she had a veil on that was blowing in the wind. And she just looked at me and she just smiled. And then, just as quick as it came, it was gone. I looked over at the clock in shock. At the last fraction of a second, it was 3:33 and switched to 3:34. At the last fraction of a second. And at that point, my life has never been the same since. So there's a lot of people that I took to the Thursday night prayer group at St. Joseph's. Some of them thanked me and said, yeah, that was good. I like that. And a lot of people returned to church because of it. Okay. Other people have said to me, I can't believe you fell for that crap. I've had people tell me that. Okay,
Well,
but
it was definitely a different place when you went.
okay, but when somebody says, "I can't believe you fell for that crap," it doesn't. What I experienced was too powerful to let something like that insult me. I couldn't. It just didn't bother me. Okay, so here we go. This is the last segment of what I'm going to tell you. This is the last segment. Okay. Ever since that happened, it's never happened again. But there are hundreds of times where no matter what I'm doing, whether I'm out in the woods metal detecting, whether I'm driving, whether I was at work, all of a sudden, I will get a sudden memory recall of that instant when that happened. And I'll see it in my mind's eye, not in real life like I did once, but the memory is so clear that it's almost like I can still just take it and look at it. Her. Okay? And every single time that happens, when it happens, I know to look at my watch, and it's going to be 3:33 or 3:33 and 33 seconds, or it's going to be 13. If I'm driving, at the instant it hits, here comes the oncoming car from over the hill with the license plate 333. Every single time. And that's to this day. Okay, so here is why we moved back to Culpeper in 2009, and I always knew that we'd be moving back. I didn't know when, and we never, ever made any plans to ever move back. Okay, until I would have these sudden feelings and thoughts that were just like all of a sudden there, that were accompanied with a lot of times the scent of roses. I neglect to mention how many times I say this happens with the numbers, but it's accompanied with roses. Not every time, but a lot of times. And I would start to think, I don't see any reason that we're going to be moving back to Emmitsburg. I'd like to. I always thought that we would, but I never gave it any thought. Then all of a sudden, these thoughts accompanied with roses and would cross my mind. And I was thinking, I'd like to move back to Emmitsburg. I loved Emmitsburg when I lived there. I loved it there. Susan loved it there. So I wasn't saying anything about it. I didn't mention it to Susan. And then one day, and this was about 3 years ago, we had been back in Culpeper now for like about 7 or 8 years, 9 years maybe. Longer than that, doesn't matter. Okay, my phone rings, and it is Dr. Michael Sullivan. He said, and there was a prayer group that still existed at St. Mary's, because St. Mary's is in a different diocese. They're in the Pennsylvania diocese, and the priest at St. Mary's was 100% believer and supporter in the apparition. Okay, so that was going on, and Mike called me one day out of the blue, and he said, Robert, are you coming to the next Thursday, to the next prayer group at St. Mary's? I said, yeah, because we went every month. It was the second Sunday of every month. I said, yeah. He said, if you don't have any plans would you like to come over to our house and have dinner? And I said, yeah, that sounds good. He says, I got something I have to talk to you about. Okay? So, I think we just died. But, all right, so we went to dinner, okay? And John was not there that night. And this is what Mike Sullivan told me. He said, the reason that I've called you and asked you if you are interested in going out to eat is because I've got a message for you. He said that the Blessed Mother had requested by name, this is what I'm being told, that we move back to Emmitsburg for the next phase of the apparitions that are going to, at some point, be validated. I said, really? Okay, and when he called, and he's telling me this, and he's saying that the Blessed Mother is asking that we come back, at the instant we hung up, a car, I'm driving while this is going on, a car pulls in front of me, whips in front of me with the license plate 333, and then a car comes from the opposite direction down Route 3, face to face, license plate 13. Absolutely perfect timing. Okay, so I go home, I pray a rosary about it. Here come the roses again. So we went back, and then Mike and Jonna and Susan and I went out to eat at the Carriage House restaurant. They called and invited us to go out to the Carriage House restaurant, which is the best place in Emmitsburg. And we were sitting there and we were eating. And we had ordered our food, had an appetizer, we're sitting at the table, and Jonna says to me, oh, I've got to tell you something. She says, because she gets an apparition every single day except Friday. Even now, but it's just private. She said, the Blessed Mother told me to tell you, because we had just moved back, we had built a house, welcome home. And when she said that, I knew to glance down at my watch, and it was 6:33. And I'm like, good grief, So now, all this stuff that I've just described to you in the last 6 months has quadrupled in the frequency and the amount of times that it's happened. And I just wanted to tell you that Jonna, who is the lady, everything else that I've told you has increased so much that I know something is coming. And because of that, and because Helen asked Barbara about it, and then I started thinking, I ought to tell the family why we moved back to Emmitsburg. Well, that's the reason. Okay? And if I were to tell you the whole story, let me tell you, you've only heard the tip of the iceberg. So there's this priest, his name was Father Leo Zonneveld, and he was in Culpeper. And I was telling him everything that happened. said to me, you need to write this down. He said, I'm telling you to write this down. So I started writing the things down. I wrote things down from the beginning up to whatever point that was when he had told me to write it down. And then as things happened in the future, I wrote things down as it happened. And then I started to notice that every single time I wrote one of those papers describing all of the things that had happened, when I finished writing and I typed the last period of the last sentence, it would be 333, or it would be 313, it would be 1333 or 333. Every single time, without fail, except once. And the one time it failed, I finished and I thought, oh, that thing took 6 pages to write that. It was describing our first trip to Medjugorje, which, by the way, everything I've told you that happened in Emmitsburg, the same exact thing happened in Medjugorje, exactly the same way. This one paper I wrote, it was not 13 or 33 when I finished. And I said, oh, okay. So I went back and I reread it. And then I noticed the daily notes that I write and keep, that those papers are written from, that I use, I had gotten something out of order and I had left something out, something very important. And I reread the paper and I said, oh, I didn't tell about this. Oh, so I had to go back and fix it. And I fixed it and I typed the last period of the last sentence by adding one more paragraph to the whole thing. And it was 3:33 and 33 seconds in the morning. This was an AM tape. Okay? Now, the whole story is right here. And most of this was given by a priest to the commission that
Robert, explain about the picture on the front cover.
I will. All right, this is the whole story right here.
That's
All right,
a writing.
it is.
It's a lot of events.
And there is not one single paper that when I wrote it, except that one that I had to correct and then it was. Okay, but this is the entire whole story up until stuff that's happened recently is last month. Okay, and there is a priest who, Father Leo died. Father Patrick had been reading these too. He said, you read these to me. And he read the whole thing, and he said to me, he said, you guard this with your life. He said, because this is going to turn out to be the definitive eyewitness account of the apparitions of Mary at St. Joseph's in Emmitsburg. He said, nothing has been documented to the extent of what is here, is what he said. And so I've kept it all written down, all right there, and to hear the whole story, I have to go from beginning to end. It got to the point where Father Patrick got transferred from Emmitsburg at Mount St. Mary's in Millington. And I said, well, yeah. And I did, and I did a few times. All right. But then you go to try to copy something like that. It wasn't that thick then. It's getting thicker. It gets thicker all the time. But then it was not practical make copies and send them to him. So he suggested that I put it on an HTML document and I could post it up to this link where he could read it just off of his computer. And I said, well, that's a good idea. I said, I can do that. But I told him that before I did that, though, I wanted to take the papers, and I said, I don't, it's not that I'm ashamed of it or I'm trying to hide anything, but I don't want to put my name on it. I don't mind if you know who I am and this and the other, but if it's going to be in a public place where somebody can read it, like at the time, I wouldn't have wanted the parishioners of Precious Blood and Culpeper to read this. I would not want them sitting there looking at me like,
You're crazy.
yeah, okay? So, what I did is I scanned it all into an HTML document, and I took all the names that would identify our family. And I just changed the names to initials. And I took the hometown of Culpeper and just replaced every word Culpeper with, in brackets, hometown, okay? And there's no place in here you can read this and identify it to me or Susan or, okay? But since then, okay, Father has shared it with other priests. He shared it with some friends of his. I told him it was all right. And I can give you the link to where if you want to look at it, if you want to see it, I'll give it to you. It's just virginmaryinemmitsburg.com. Doesn't have our names on it. It's kind of sanitized in that way to keep that out. But it's the whole accurate story. It's Virgin Mary, all one word, Virgin Mary, in Emmitsburg, EMMITSBURG.com.
Mary
At Virgin Mary in Emmitsburg. I'll write it down.
It was funny when you would go to the Thursday night winter group meetings, and I didn't go with them for probably a year before I would go, because they'd go and come back and tell the story. Well, the first time I went, the minute I was in the church, I smelled roses.
Yes.
Still Thursday
I
night?
did
No.
it the very first time I went, and they asked me to do a decade of the rosary.
Is it only once a
Is
month?
I hadn't prayed the rosary either, and I said, yes, I did it.
Sometimes
But you would
you'll
go
find
there, and this is awful to say, but you know how you go to church
When
and
the sun
sometimes
comes down.
you're in there an hour and you're looking.
Mary in Emmitsburg.com.
The table's
So much longer. Well, you would go
Sometimes
there
I come up.
and you would be in church 2 hours or more, and you
Find
would
right
not
there. Then
You,
come pick
you
me up.
would stay there,
Come
and
down.
then
So if you come down and.
I would get the
Okay.
kids, we would get out of work, and the kids would get out of school,
And then we
and
go
then I
back
could
to
pick up
Yeah.
Susan,
Yeah.
and we would drive on a Thursday night up to Emmitsburg, and we would get home like 11 or 12 at night, and everybody had to get up and go to school the next morning, but you couldn't wait until the next Thursday came,
Yeah.
so you could do it again.
Yep.
And it just called you back, and you went, and you knew.
Mm-hmm.
I remember riding down C Avenue one night, and it was dark, of course, because we were leaving, and there was a couple walking right in front of the basilica there, and they were just walking, and the smell of roses was so strong in the car, and all I could think was, are they not smelling it? They're walking like everything is normal, but it was such a different feeling in a different place when you were there at that time. It was definitely different.
So a priest friend of mine, this past September, his name, he's in the Diocese of Arlington, and he invited me this past September to go to a place over in Spain called Garabandal with him. and they were going to go to Garabandal, and they had some other people that were going, and Father Ziegler invited me to go, and I decided that I was going to go. Okay, and I did go, and I want to tell you, and we went to Lourdes as well. Okay, and I will tell you that everything that I just described to you that happened in St. Joseph's, okay, started up and happened, boom, 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 in Garabandal and in Lourdes. It was an absolute, almost carbon copy of Emmitsburg, of the events that were taking place and the things that were happening to me, at least. I can only testify for myself. But the whole trip to Garabandal, the whole trip to Lourdes was just absolutely 100% in sync with everything that was here. It was like Garabandal and Medjugorje and Lourdes, Emmitsburg. It's all one seamless fabric. Not a seam to be found anywhere. It's just one continuous. Okay? And now, why are these apparitions happening? Okay? Our Lady said over in Garabandal in 1961 that the purpose of those apparitions was because mankind has gone so far out of whack that God is going to perform an event that Our Lady called the warning. And the warning is where every man, woman, and child of age of reason will see their soul in the same exact state as God sees it. And if you were to die at that moment, you won't. But you will know what your fate would be if you did. And you're going to have time to make the necessary corrections. Well, she said the same thing in Medjugorje, and she has said the same thing in Emmitsburg, and she said the same thing to Father Stefano Gobi. All right? So she hasn't beat around the bush. She said that the apparitions in Emmitsburg are a direct preparation from heaven for the coming warning that was predicted first in Garabandal in 1961. Reaffirmed 20 years later in Medjugorje in 1981. Reaffirmed in Emmitsburg. So, I've never been through anything like this.
Never thought you would.
Tell them about the ceiling in that St. Joseph's Church.
Yeah. It doesn't do it now.
It doesn't?
It doesn't do it now.
Did back then?
It did back then. People started to notice when you walk in St. Joseph's Church, there's a beautiful circular painting on the ceiling. And it's the Holy Family. It's Joseph on the right, Mary on the left, and the child Jesus at the age of about 12 in the middle. And they're walking down a dirt road. And in the picture, there's cattails, like plants, part of the scenery in there. Okay, if you look up, this was only during the time of the apparitions. If you look up, you look at them, and you see them walking, and it looks like they are walking in the direction of the door.
To you.
To you. Okay? They're walking towards you. Okay. You walk up to the front of the church. You walk up to the front of the church and look up, and now they are again walking towards you, but instead of walking towards the door, they're walking towards the direction of the altar. Okay? And that went on for, I'm not sure, it wasn't very long, a couple of months. When the apparition stopped, that stopped.
What
But-
about Ted's grandson?
Yeah, and the statue.
Ted Szymanski, who is an old guy that
He was
met
the-
the first night. He was the guy that was willing to buy me a pair of shoes and a pair of pants. Okay, he had a grandson, and this was before I ever got there. This was like 4 years earlier, because the apparitions had went on for 7 years, and I was there for the last 2.5. Had a grandson who was born normal, but became mentally retarded because he was given aspirins while he had chicken pox when he was little, and he came down with a condition known as Rye syndrome, and it left him severely retarded, bad shape. Well, they were at the Thursday night prayer group, and everything had ended. It was Ted, his grandson, Ted's daughter, who was Christopher's mother.
It is Christopher.
Not
the
my
grandson.
Yeah. And they went over for the coffee and the donuts that was after the Thursday night prayer group. And Diane, the mother, she was standing there talking to Father Al Pearson, who was the pastor of St. Joseph's Church. And it was time to leave. And they were getting ready to leave, and Christopher was out in the vestibule of the parish hall where there's a statue, a hand-carved wooden, not quite life-size, but big statue of St. Joseph. And Christopher was standing there, and he refused to leave. He said, "Come on, Christopher, it's time to go home." Christopher said, no, boy, talking to me.
Marion Barnes is the host now.